Hey everybody, it's Jeff Brown over at the house, and you ever have one of those days? Man, today was just one of those days, and I just thought it was never going to end, and it finally did. And here I am. I thought, well, what a good way to end the day by telling you guys a story. So today I'm going to tell you about the time that we hid inside my dad's apartment for an entire Saturday. So I was probably about 14 at the time, and my parents got divorced a few years before, and Dad had moved into this small apartment, little bachelor apartment across town. And my brother and I used to ride the city bus over there about every other week and spend the weekend at Dad's house. And so on this weekend, we had done just that, and Friday night was typically watching TV till late with Dad and, eating pizza. But I remember on this weekend, we had this big plan for Saturday. And I don't really remember what it was, but I remember it was going to be a whole lot of fun, and we were excited about it. So Saturday morning, we wake up, and Dad fixes breakfast for my brother and I, and we're chomping that down. And right when we get our coats on and we're about to go off on this fun Saturday adventure, we hear this pound, pound, pound on the door. Norm, it's Bill. Pound, pound, pound. Norm, it's Bill. And my dad looks at us and he goes, and he looks at it and a couple seconds go by and pound, pound, pound. Norm, it's Bill. And this guy's yelling at the top of his lungs. And this is a tiny little apartment we're in. I mean, we're standing like 2 feet, 3 feet from the door, and this guy's screaming like he's yelling across a stadium or something, So my dad leans in close to us. He gets real close and he goes, if this guy hears us, he will follow us all day. So my brother and I stand there. We're wait while this guy continues to pound on the door, and my dad has no intention of answering the door. So we stand there, and a while goes by, and this guy keeps pounding on the door. And I mean, it's not nonstop, but every few seconds he pounds, and then he waits, and it's like he waits and he listens or something, and then he starts pounding on the door again. And my dad continues to just give us this, So a while went by, and at some point, my dad kind of rolls his eyes and he starts taking his coat off. So my brother and I look, and we're like, all right. So we start taking our coats off, and there we stand, and Dad grabs our coats and kind of quietly moves them over and sets them in a chair or something. And Dad looks at us and kind of motions to the couch, and we go over there and sit down. And this guy continues to pound on the door, yelling every few minutes for my dad, and he's quite, you can almost feel him at the door, listening as he'd pound and then he'd listen, he'd pound and he'd listen. So we're sitting there, and I don't know how much time passes by, but a while goes by as we're sitting on the couch, and my dad gets up and he kind of looks at us, like he had this idea, and he quietly goes back into his bedroom and he comes out with this deck of cards. So we're sitting now in the living room, and he starts dealing cards onto the coffee table. In silence, we sat there and played cards for a long time, listening to this guy pound on the door and not making a peep. And periodically, this is how my dad was. Periodically, we knew the situation. We knew we were supposed to be quiet, and my dad would repeatedly go, like if, I'd get 1 or 2 pounds out of the guy on the door, and then my dad would give us the, as if we didn't know the situation. And there we sat quietly playing cards in silence, 3 feet from this guy pounding on the door. So more time passes, and we play cards, and I don't know, I don't know if you played cards, but half the fun of playing cards is, laughing and, camaraderie, and there was none of that. We just sat there quietly playing. So I don't know, several hours had passed, and at some point, Dad gets up and goes into the kitchen and starts making us a sandwich. So we're sitting there, and Dad quietly comes in, like I say, with 2 sandwiches on plates, sits them down, no chips. Chips would have been way too loud, and he sets it down. So now it's getting crazy. because we're inside this apartment now so long that there's no way at this point, my dad's going to answer at all. What can he say now? Oh, I didn't hear you out there, Bill. So we're stuck in this house. So I think we ate our sandwiches and we sat there for some time longer, and from time to time, my dad would just lean in and he'd whisper to us about something or other, and tell us, I'm sorry, this is terrible. I wanted to take you out there. And he'd tell us this, but we could barely hear each other because we're just whispering. And, and then I remember when the first time my brother had to go to the bathroom. And so he's like, Dad, I have to go to the bathroom. And Dad's like, go. Do not flush. He's telling us, like, no flushing. Flushing would be too loud. That would give us away. So there we sat, and the afternoon wore on, and time there was pounding at the door. And now, it probably reached to where, 5 minutes would go by, and there was a few times where enough time went by where my dad was kind of like, thinking, maybe he left, and my dad would quietly go over the door and kind of try to get a listen and see if and then pound, he'd start pounding again. So I remember just sitting there as the afternoon wore on, and at some point we were just, our hearts were broken. The whole day was getting ruined, and there we sat. And so we just sat in silence. All of us, I think our arms just kind of hung by our side. We sat there, just as the clock literally ticked by on the wall, because I do remember that, just sitting there in silence, when he wasn't pounding, all you'd hear was tick, tick, tick of this clock on the wall. So, more time went by. I don't know. We played a few more hands of cards, but we just, we got to the point where we were just sad, and it was clear my dad was never going to confront this guy, which, here's the thing. I'm telling you this story and you're thinking to yourself, come on, Jeff, you spent the whole day Saturday sitting inside your dad's apartment. At some point, he wasn't gonna, But you got to understand my dad. He was the most non-confrontational person you've ever met. He would just, he just wasn't like that. This wasn't the only time this kind of thing happened. Dad would just avoid confrontation at all costs. So here we sit, and the days wearing on, and this was wintertime, mind you. So, we live up in Oregon. The days are very short during the winter. So at some point, the sun started going down. The light started to dim through the window, and we sat there, and Dad also was not going to turn any lights on. So as the day wore on, and it got darker and darker and turned into evening, we still sat there, and this idiot is still sitting out there pounding at the door. And there's other apartments around, so I would have thought at some point, somebody else would have confronted him. Nobody did. He just stood out there yelling for Norm, and announcing that it was Bill. And it's insane. It's absolutely insane because, you think about it, what was going on in his mind that my dad was in there all the while, had not heard him pounding on the door for, 6 hours or something. And even if he had heard him pounding on the door, maybe Norm, my dad, didn't realize it was Bill, so it was about insane. And I just remember as it started to get darker, Dad looked at me and, we weren't turning any lights on, so it wasn't ridiculous enough that we sat there all day with no noise, but now we're sitting there as it gets dark. Well, I think the only friend was, or the saving grace of it, let me put it that way, was that it was wintertime, and as the sun dropped, it started getting cold. So this guy's been sitting out on our stoop there, out on my dad's porch, on cement or whatever, letting his butt cheeks get cold for however many hours as we sat quietly inside the apartment. And I guess he started to get cold. And the funny part was, right at the end, he gives one more mighty pound. He pounds on that door really good, yelling Norm. And then he kind of says something like this. All right, Norm, I'll have to catch up with you later. And then he walks away. And the thing was, you'd think he'd walk away and my dad would go, oh, thank goodness. But no, Dad stood there still giving us the, like he might be pulling a fake out or something now after all this time. So Dad finally waited for I don't know how long, and he was getting a little more bold, and we were talking a little bit louder. And Dad finally went over, and really stuck his ear to the door. And at some point, he opened it up, and he was gone. And so the thing was, I never even met this guy. My dad had met him. My dad was taking these night classes, and I guess he had met this guy in the night classes, and this guy had befriended my dad. My dad did not befriend him, and had basically explained to us later on that, the guy, he felt like the guy was an idiot, which, yeah, based on what we saw, that was a pretty good observation. But, I think back now, and who was crazier, this guy or my dad? I mean, here this guy spends an entire Saturday pounding on someone's door and sitting outside their door, and we at least ate a sandwich. As far as I know, he stood out there and didn't have a drink of water, go to the bathroom, eat anything. He sat out there and pounded on the door. So this guy's obviously nuts, but who's more nuts? The guy pounding on the door, or my dad sitting in silence with his 2 kids when we were supposed to be doing something and letting the entire day go by without saying nothing? So I don't know. You tell me which person is crazier, And that's my story. I mean, it sounds insane, and it was insane, but I'm telling you, it was the truth. We sat there, Saturday burned, hiding in the apartment all day. Yeah, crazy. So anyway, I thank you for listening to my story. Hey, I got a lot more stories where that came from. So if you like that, give me a like down there. Subscribe to my channel, and I got a lot more stories to tell you. So thanks for spending the time today to listen to my story. I say God bless you. Have a great day, and I'll be talking to you soon.